So, hello everyone. Thank you all for joining. Joining us today are four panelists, all Imperial students or alumni, who are founders and co-founders of their own companies. If any of you have any questions for them, feel free to type them into the chat and there will be a Q&A session at the end. So we'll start off by introducing our panelists. First, we have Tristan, a co-founder of Settle Up Earth and a current PhD student. Tristan, would you like to introduce yourself and your company?
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me along to the panel today. It's great to be here. So, as Brigid kindly said, my name is Tristan. I'm the co-founder of Settle Up Earth. And essentially, we look at the fact that over 60% of adults acknowledge themselves as climate concerned, but often don't feel empowered to do anything about that. And although we can take actions to reduce those impacts in the environment, there are always going to be underlying emissions that we just can't avoid. So that's where the field of carbon offsets come in. And by partnering with the highest quality forestry projects in the world, we're really looking to reduce the barriers to offsetting that carbon, both for individuals via a monthly subscription that lets you become carbon neutral for about the price of a coffee a week, but also increasingly with businesses helping them offset the emissions of their products and support high quality considered tree planting to counteract some of the emissions of their activities as well. So that's what we do. As Brigid said, I'm currently also coming towards the end of a PhD at Imperial. And I've been here for quite a while, so happy to talk on sort of what it's been like coming through the Imperial ecosystem, doing all of this as well.
Great, thank you. Next, we have Réka, a co-founder and COO of Multus Media. She's studying a Master of Research in System and Synthetic Biology. Would you like to introduce yourself and your company?
Yeah, sure. So, hi, I'm Réka. I'm just finishing off my master's, but I've been at Imperial for almost 4 years now, so I can definitely also talk a bit about the background on transitioning from very early beginning undergrad into like a startup founder. At Multus Media, we are creating growth media for cultivated meat, which means that we are creating specific nutrients which are low cost and high performing to make cultivated meat affordable and profitable. In terms of what's cultivated meat, I think I'll leave that to Benjamina to introduce. Yeah, so we have been going for over 2 years with my co-founders, and yeah, we're just wrapping up our seed round actually right now, so it's a really exciting period.
Great, thank you so much. So next we have Benjamina, the founder and CEO of HigherSteaks. She has a master in chemical engineering from Imperial. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. So I graduated, I think now about 4 or 5 years ago. As mentioned, master's in chemical engineering. While I was doing that, did some work in 3D printing, fragrance and flavoring, did some marketing work. When I graduated, started a small company for about a year before founding HigherSteaks. So we're a cultivated meat startup. So what we do is we take a small sample of cells from the animal that we expand to recreate meat that is more sustainable and better for our health. So started this really to have the maximum impact on people's health. We're based out of Cambridge and now a team of 10. So yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Lastly, we have Reese, a co-founder and business lead of Synthesis and a biology student. Would you like to introduce yourself and your company?
Yeah, sure. So as Bridget already said, I'm a biology student, second year undergrad at Imperial, and I co-founded Synthesis back in the early days of 2020. So we started right when the pandemic hit us. So that was great. And what we do, I think, is best explained in a little short elevator pitch, just because most people aren't aware of the problem. But essentially, 52% of the fish you eat come from fish farms. These fish, farm fish, need omega-3 to thrive and be nutritious. So the question is, where does this omega-3 come from? Well, it turns out it actually comes from wild-caught fish. in the form of fish oil. And if you do the maths, it turns out you get an average of about 816 wild caught fish are fed to just one salmon over its lifetime. And often you'll get more salmon in a single fish farm than you would salmon in the entire wild ocean. So it's quite a big problem. And so what we're doing to solve that is we're developing a novel bacterial strain along with novel machinery that converts plant oils into omega-3, and that brings down the projected cost by 80%. So yeah, that's what we do.
Great. Thank you all for your self-introduction. So moving on, we'd like to know more about your startup creation journeys. So let's start from Reese. What inspired you to create a sustainable startup, and how did you prepare for the founding of the startup?
So for me, the startups I've been involved in were all quite spontaneous. So Synthesis was very, spontaneous. I went to a biohackathon set up by the Synthetic Biology Society at Imperial, and a bunch of us there just kind of bashed our brains together, and we just found a problem, and over the course of a couple of months we developed what we thought was a viable solution. So there wasn't really anything that actually inspired me beyond just wanting to do a fun little project in synthetic biology. However, as time has gone on, I think especially this summer, I was doing quite a bit of self-reflection, and I just find myself increasingly worried about climate change and all of the various different nature crises we're facing. I think a really poignant report is by the IUCC, where they say we need to reduce our carbon footprint by, I think, 45% globally before 2030 if we're going to avoid a 2-degree increase in global temperatures. And I think, since reading that, I've really felt this drive to try and build as many startups and try to have as much of a positive impact as I possibly can. So yeah, my inspiration has kind of grown and grown as I've been involved with this company.
Yeah, great. I'm glad to hear that. So how about Réka? We noticed that you're also, together with Reese, members of Synthetic Biology Club. Are there any relevant experiences that inspire you to create your startup?
Yeah, so even before coming to university, one of the key reasons to choose biology was because I wanted to have a positive impact on the world. And soon after joining Imperial, I realized that synthetic biology was really a key tool for that. So I joined the Synthetic Biology Society, where I met my co-founders, Kevin and Kai. And just a year before Reese's competition, we won the synthetic biology competition. But then soon we realized that, that funding was not enough for anything, really. So we just started entering more and more competitions. So that's how we realized the business opportunity in Multus as well. Right before Imperial, I was part of the European Summer Program on Rationality, which was like a key 2-week course on basically an introduction into rationality and effective altruism, and in general thinking about the world in a quantifiable way, in a way that we can actually make a difference in it. And that really helped me go into starting a startup.
Great. I noticed that you mentioned competitions, which help secure your funding. So how did these competitions prepare you or improve the idea that you've came up with?
Oh yeah, sure. It definitely helped a lot. So first we entered VCC, so the Venture Catalyst Challenge at Imperial, which even though we didn't really progress to the final stages, but that really gave us the framework of thinking about how businesses work, all the ideas about funding, because I think there is no real handbook on creating a startup. It's all about getting experience and getting exposure to already all these ideas, and sort of just everything just sticks to you. So I highly encourage everybody who wants to start a startup to go to these different competitions, conferences, programs, accelerators, because they do provide a huge amount of value. So right after VCC, we entered FondsMed, that we won. Then we entered the Climate Launchpad as well, which was like a global EU-supported early business ideas competition. That was also super helpful because that also gave us like a global network. And these competitions also give you a lot of traction. So you could get exposed to different newspapers, they make interviews with you, and then later on, different investors can contact you based on those as well.
If I can maybe, oh, sorry.
I think I'm going to say the same thing as you, so you go ahead.
I mean, if I would jump ahead, I think competitions and accelerators and all of that are helpful. I do think that sometimes it can be an overload, and we've had times where we've joined, I mean, the first accelerator I ever did, which was Entrepreneur First, was super helpful. But after that, sometimes some accelerators were really, you know, a lot of content that we already knew, but you kind of had to attend, or even if you didn't actually, if you weren't actually obliged to attend, you kind of felt like you had to. So I think sometimes you got to evaluate as well where you are. So I think those are really helpful at the beginning, but also make sure that you don't that you evaluate how much is it actually going to bring you, because they might be free, and be careful as well when they aren't. So anyone that will get you to pay for an accelerator, and obviously if they take any equity, how well known the accelerator is. But I would just be cautious of what it actually brings versus the time that it would take from your everyday you know, operations. And similar as well with competitions, it's really helpful. But again, as you start getting bigger and bigger, it might be less helpful to spend, you know, a week or two working on a grant that will give you 5 or 10K, even though, you know, it's free money. So I think everything, you know, that you've said, Réka, is super helpful, but I would just be cautious as you all scale, and as you maybe do one accelerator, is it really worth it? And yeah, also be really cautious of any accelerator that would ask you to pay. I don't know if that's what you were gonna say.
Yeah, actually I wasn't, but I think that's a really good point nonetheless, actually, because that's a moment we just hit, I'd say a few months ago as well, where we kind of realized, yeah, we need to stop doing the competitions. We've got enough funding from them now, sort of pre-seed funding, I suppose you could call it, and you know, now it's just more of a waste of time. But I would definitely emphasize using them right at the beginning of your journey, when you're still trying to thaw out what your idea even is, especially if you haven't got business experience before, because I didn't, and going to these competitions was really useful for kind of developing that business mindset that I think Réka touched upon earlier.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, I just wanted to mention that I definitely very much agree with you, Benjamina, and we did have the point where actually it was the HALT accelerator which we at the end pulled out of, because we just realized that they just provide the same value that the previous competitions already did.
Yeah, and it's the same as well for conferences. So if you don't have a good network in the beginning, super helpful to get a network, especially whenever things get back to in person. So super helpful. But I remember thinking at a point where, you know, especially again, if it was a conference where we would travel all the way to San Francisco and things like that, at some point the people recycle and it becomes like a high school reunion, and then you really have to think, okay, do I really want to spend the money and time to go all the way to San Francisco for a high school reunion with the people that I already know? So I think it just, again, being cautious of that, and it's super helpful at the start, but just be aware of not getting to the rhythm. And the more you advance, the more people will ask you as well to come and speak and all of that. So you want to make sure that you're set your bar higher and higher. So for us in the beginning, we paid to go to conferences. Then it was, okay, we'll go if it's free. And then it's kind of, okay, we'll go if it's really, really helpful or you pay me. And then now sometimes even if someone pays me, I might not even go to the other side of the world because it will take too much time. So I think you want to make sure that you progress the bar as you evolve, and not, think back in time and think, oh, it's free, great.
I think to chime in on that as well, it's important to think of the very start and the outset. I think looking back, Réka and Benjamina, I think you both had certain sort of startups and businesses before your current one, and that gives you such valuable experience that can't really be learned in accelerators or conferences or competitions. And that learned experience is something that I'd really encourage anyone that's thinking about it just to go out and get it, because your first startup, chances are it's not going to go where you think it is. Nothing ever goes where you think it will go. But just the learning experience.
Second as well.
Yeah, so go out there and get it. And the conferences and the competitions, accelerators, they're all really, really valuable. But I completely agree. They have their space and they have their time. And that's at the earlier stages for sure.
No, for sure. And I mean, if you think about accelerators, I mean, they'll usually, for example, give you a talk. You can learn all the theory about how to negotiate a deal when you have someone in front of you that's negotiating and that's been negotiating for 20 years and you're in your first negotiation. You can read all the books you want, but it's much harder, and you probably want as well. I mean, I think if I had to choose one of the things, it's really like anything that will increase your network, because what you want is the people that when you're at that negotiation and you're the person that, it's your first negotiation or maybe second or third, and someone's been negotiating for 30 years, you want to be able to have advisors or mentors or even connections that you can go up to and say, hey, that's what they're proposing. Is that normal? Is that not normal? What should I say? And back you up, and help you as well, and sometimes even come in the room with you to just have leverage and power. And if someone tries to screw you over, just have that person that's there and say, hey, I have a reputation, so if you screw them over, I'm going to tell all my network that what you're trying to do.
Definitely, advisors are so important and so helpful.
And accelerators help with that, right? Because they have also a lot of companies and people don't want to mess with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and actually sometimes you'll even discover advisors or mentors through accelerators and things like that too.
Great. We also noticed that based on your company website, Tristan, in your team, there's an advisor from Imperial College, actually. So what role does he play in your team? And what's the importance of having an advisor in your opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. So Professor Nar McDowell, who works here at Imperial, he came on for us as a non-executive director to advise really quite early on in the company. So we're similar to Reese in your startup. We were founded a year ago this week, actually. So not that old as a company, and we approached Niall quite early on, really to help shape our product and to advise us on how to approach this problem properly. So, there are a million companies out there providing carbon offsets. They've been doing it for 30 years, and it's been a space that's been plagued with issues of sort of lack of transparency and some quite high-profile projects that have maybe not done exactly what they claim to do. So sort of we looked at that and said, look, we want to take a fresh approach because there's definitely a space for offsetting the carbon. It's going to be absolutely crucial to meeting the climate goals that have sort of been set by the Paris Agreement and, through discussions like COP26 that are happening later this year. But it's got to be done to a high standard, and it's something that we just weren't seeing prioritized. So we really wanted to take advice from experts in the field from a really, really early stage. And I think it's really important when you're setting out with your startup to understand what you want from an advisor and not just to go to anybody. You really need to talk to your co-founders, talk to your team, understand what the input is that you need, and then be very, very selective with the people that you reach out to, because they do form your thinking in quite a notable way. But also they've got limited time, and you've only got limited time. No one can have a team of 10, 15, 20 advisors, because that's just not the way that that setup operates. So I think one really important piece of advice that I'd give would be to pick your advisors carefully and to understand what you need them for, because then you can really sort of leverage that to give you the maximum impact from that relationship.
Great. Thank you all for sharing your insights on the importance of joining competitions, having advisors and experts in your team. So now let's move on to something more recent. So after creating the startup, what were some of the challenges and how did you overcome them along the way? Is financial issue or networking still a concern? Tristan, would you like to start first?
Yeah, of course. So, well, where to start? I think everyone runs into challenges with sort of developing a company. And they can range from really small day-to-day operational challenges to things that really come to the crux of what you're doing and why you're doing it. I think if I had to pick sort of one example to focus on, it would be the fact that you've always got this dichotomy of plunging money and time into developing a product and proving a product market fit for that product. And one kind of feeds off the other. And there's kind of this maxim in the space that's, deploy fast, deploy quick, and fail quickly, basically. And I think that's really, really important, really, really true. It's something that we've learned sort of over the years. But it is something that's sort of almost implemented to the extreme now. And I think there's a balance to be met, because if you deploy a product that is too quickly pulled together and maybe too bootstrapped, you won't get engagement necessarily, because it won't be of the standards that's required. So it's something that we've seen a little bit. So we've developed our own carbon calculator that actually currently is still hosted on Typeform, which is an online survey sort of software. And that's given certain limitations. And I think it's given certain limitations to the user experience. It means we haven't really been able to test that product market fit in a way that we wanted to. So we're now in the process of sort of finalizing development of our own sort of in-house hosted calculator that's going to be directly on our website with our backend and so on. And that's going to give us a lot more power to build a product that actually does what we want and underpins that sort of monthly carbon offset subscription. And I think one of the biggest sort of challenges or lessons that we've learned from that is that you can pull something together and bootstrap it very quickly, very early. But really, you need to understand what your assumptions are that you want to test and make sure that the product that you're bootstrapping is going to test those assumptions fully and in the way that you want to. But then there's also a balance not to go too far the other way. So it's an interesting one. I really stick by that: test quickly and fail quickly, but make sure you're testing the right things. And I think that would be sort of one of the key challenges that we've come up to, is seeing exactly where that balance sits.
Yeah, actually, just to add to that, I think wholeheartedly agree with what you said, Tristan. I think the only issue I have is with some industries, you can't be super quick about deploying a particular product. So I would say, if you're in the digital space, it's great, right? You can just type some code, maybe in your bedroom, and just upload your website, whatever it is, and you can get it tested really easily. But if you're developing, okay, I guess synthetic biology is a great example. These things take months, years to develop, even just a prototype. So, you have to find alternative ways to test your product market fit without developing a prototype necessarily. So whether that's simple market interviews with potential customers, things like that.
I think it's a really interesting point as well, because one thing that we've seen again and again is that all of the market research in the world is only valuable if you actually get customers to the point where you actually ask them to part with money. Because, I mean, if we take our example, everyone is going to say that they want to take action on their carbon emissions. I think you'd be hard pushed to find people that wouldn't say that realistically. But then when you turn around and say, do you want to take action on your carbon emissions, and it's going to cost you £10 a month as an individual, the equation there completely flips. And I think you're right. It's really, really easy to test that with a software-based product, for sure. And I'd be interested how you guys have come up with that, because obviously your products are much more lab-based, much more sort of expensive and time-driven in their development, and how you've sort of approached that market validation question on your side.
Yeah, I mean, so for synthesis, it's mostly been actually going out, speaking to the customers, not quite face-to-face, unfortunately, because COVID, but as face-to-face as we could be through video calls and such like, and really basing the questions we asked them off those assumptions that I think you kind of mentioned earlier, Tristan. So what we did is we had what is called assumption chart, I think, and essentially you write down a bunch of assumptions and you plot it on this chart, with one axis being impact and the other one being certainty, right? So if you've got something that's got low impact and high certainty, probably don't investigate that, because you know that assumption's probably fine. But if you've got something that's high impact and low certainty, yeah, probably you want to go investigate that thing. And then base some questions off of that assumption that you can then ask customers in a very open-ended way, right? So that there isn't any bias that can happen when you are taking these interviews. Yeah, that was the primary way we did market validation. But obviously, I think you made a really good point, actually. Market research can only take you so far until you're actually selling the products at the end of the day. And I think, you know, as we develop our products more and more, from proof of concepts to perhaps more and more final versions of the products, you know, there'll be more and more tests to come. So something we'll do down the road actually is we'll be product testing our omega-3 into a fish feed, and basically doing a fish feed trial, so that customers can actually see the data for themselves and then make a decision off of that.
Great. How about Réka or Benjamina? Any specific challenges for sustainable startups when compared to other startups?
I mean, loads, and mirror a lot of what was said. I think the key thing is you really, it's difficult, and I'm guessing all of you are scientists from your backgrounds, and I think sometimes it's difficult to tell yourself, I'm going to do something that's less than perfect. And we've had that, I mean, that issue in the beginning. We were very like, oh, well, if we do a prototype and it's not perfect and it's, you know, half of it is from plant-based and things like that, then that would be a problem. And kind of for ages, we kind of were stuck on that. And realistically, that really hindered us in terms of fundraising. And you kind of sometimes have to play the game of, especially if you need, any time you need fundraising, you kind of have to play the investor game and play the hype and not get it, you know. Yes, it's annoying that everything is hype and everything, you know, that investors just work on FOMO, but realistically, that's the game, and you're better off playing it and get, you know, and then getting the money and doing the serious research than being stubborn and waiting. But I think in terms of, the thing is, the main thing I would say is just there's so many challenges, and what you want is to really just be super resilient and find the network that can help you go through those challenges. And that's my main advice, is that there's no challenge that you can't solve, and it's not over until it's over. And the main thing that will help you go through all those challenges is having the right network, so that if you have a problem, you can either get people in your network that have gone through that problem, or help get the right people that can help you then solve that problem.
I think if I could just pitch in on the challenges and the network part as well, I think it's really, really eye-opening how much impact your network can have, both in overcoming challenges, but also into driving new opportunities. And that doesn't just mean sort of money-making business opportunities, but it's really, really been eye-opening to me how sort of one introduction to the next introduction can, put you in a room with a high commissioner or put you in a room at Google, or, it really has power to leverage those networks. So absolutely sort of developing those networks and nurturing those networks is absolutely one of the most important things you can do, I think, as a founder.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of these. And I think I just wanted to add that as a founder, you tend to sort of have the expectation that, okay, I need to know everything and I need to be aware of everything, and that I'm a failure because I don't know something. And it's really important to understand that there's a lot of things that you just need to learn on the go. You just need to go and ask specific people about the specific things, and don't be afraid of asking for help, because nobody is born in a way that they know how to do different financial models or something like that. You just need to go out and sort of find the solutions yourself, partly from the internet, partly from your network, partly from asking anybody, really.
And sometimes there's hiring someone that can do it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Skills that you will just not be able to acquire in the time that you need. And sometimes you need to acknowledge that and either ask your network to help interview, take a risk, and just get someone to do it, right? I mean, I don't know how to culture sales. Like, I will never probably know how to culture sales, but that's fine. I don't need to. But again, there's just things that sometimes, again, legal. I mean, one of the big thing I would say as well is, if you want to be the CEO of the company, a lot of your work is going to be the legal. So you better like legal work, because otherwise, be COO, be CSO, be something else. But CEO role is a lot of legals.
I mean, I guess it depends on the company. So, for example, in our company, it's more the COO. So it's me who's dealing more with the CEO, with the legals. So.
True, but someone's got to do it.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really important part of one of the founders.
Yeah, because it's everywhere, right? It's going to be all of the deals you make, all of, IP, anything, everything,
Hiring.
and when you're hiring, HR, I mean, there's just so much from every aspect of the business that you really need. And you can't just, you need lawyers, because if something goes wrong, you need to point a finger at someone. But you need to also know what questions to ask to the lawyers. And the lawyers will always take the safe route. And you want to make sure as well, okay, but why can't I go this way? And why can't I push this in my investor? And you want to know what to ask, because the lawyers will probably tell you, oh, yes, like the easiest thing that your investors are likely to say yes to, right? But you got to be the one pushing for, well, why can't I do this? What do you think about this? Is this standard? Have you seen anyone get away with this? And really push the boundaries. And again, whether it's an issue that you have or a deal you're negotiating, you really want to, know your shit, and then have the lawyer back it up and tell you if that's right or not.
Also, one of the reasons why you should be highly aware of all the legal stuff is lawyers are really expensive. So you only want to go to them with like specific questions, very short things, very small, easy to sort things.
100%.
I just want to say that I think maybe all the legal talk is quite scary for people who haven't entered this space before. It tends to be something you enter a little bit down the road. It's not like you have to hire a lawyer from day one. I just wanted to put that out there.
Enterprise level.
I would, having been in situation, I would actually recommend against it. Spend the time and the money on day one, get the legal sorted. I was in a situation with a co-founder where we're like, yeah, we'll do it the next round and the next round, and waiting months, and then shit happens and you have no shareholder agreement. I would take the time and the money to do it from the start. So I'll disagree on that.
I just want to emphasize, when I say from day one, I don't mean like the first round or something like that. I mean from even from the inception of the company. I mean from like ideation, from the point of coming up with an idea. Yeah.
But there are a lot of
with someone and your co-founders, and then the point that you
I can see your point. I'm also aware that a lot of people don't have access to those funds from day one.
No, but
and they
I
have to
think
go on the competitions first that we were discussing
But do
earlier,
something.
perhaps to get funds.
Read, ask network, like ask us, like reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to help you. Reach out to people and find the network and try. A lot of lawyers will do first consultations for free.
also just on that note, Enterprise Lab also have some legal help where they can, for example, we went in for like a 15-minute quick call with one of them, and they literally drafted the document, like a 1-page document for us, which is completely legally binding and everything. And that was really useful. And I think, for example, shareholders agreement, there's a really great template on seed legals, and there are really good templates. There are really good, like Benjamina said.
It's not perfect, but do something.
Yeah.
There's IOD. IOD is the Institute of Directors. It's £100 a year. They give you loads of legal templates, and you have up to, I think, 25 consultations with lawyers, all within the £100 per year. There are solutions out there. Yes, at some point you should probably pay someone a couple thousands to get a proper shareholder agreement, but I would say really have something from day one, at least between the founders' agreements. And again, even NDAs, you have things online, try and educate yourself. Yeah.
Just to echo that as well, there's so much out there. Yes, you can hire a lawyer on day one, absolutely, and I think it's really, really important to address those sort of legal frameworks that you need to put in place. But there are larger networks you can use. So in the green tech space, we're a member of an organization called the Green Tech Alliance, and they kind of link you up with, again, their network of advisors, and that's a way that we can bring in free or cheap legal advice. Obviously, there are things like the Institute of Directors that are absolutely fantastic, but also, really in the early days, I wouldn't advise against just sort of picking up bits that you see here and there. If someone else sends you an NDA, recycle that. An NDA broadly is reapplicable, sort of across the board. If you've had a shareholder agreement that you've maybe previously seen as part of a company, recycle bits of that. You've got to be careful that you do it in the right way. But, broadly speaking, there are ways to get hold of those legal frameworks.
I would check that that's legal, but maybe take a template and see what's different between the template and the NDA.
Well, exactly. You've got to do it in the right way. You can't recycle something word for word, but an NDA in its phrasing is much the same from one to the other. So you can at least see where that's coming from and how you can structure that, broadly speaking.
Yeah, I think there's a great NDA template, or I wouldn't say great because it's not done by a lawyer, but there is an NDA template by the government if you just go onto their website. So yeah, there's some legal jargon in it, but you don't have to worry about typing it up yourself.
It's also really important to go through all of these contracts point by point and try to understand, okay, what does this mean? And if there's something that you just don't understand, make sure that you do, and then you look it up, you go and ask people, okay, what does this mean?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for reminding us of the legal side of like starting a startup and running your startup along the way. It's definitely important to bear in mind. So now let's move on to something more general related to the food industry. So based on your experience, how do you think the perception of lab-grown food or livestock feed will progress in the near future? Is it a good area for future graduates to work in?
I feel like Réka and Benjamina, you guys are the experts on cultured meat and things like that. I can maybe comment on feed later, but
yeah, I'm happy to start. Obviously, yes. It'd be hard. I'm spending my life in this, so I'm not going to say that no. But I think it's definitely a great opportunity, and again, I think it's something you want to try get some exposure, and you're seeing more and more people as well interested. So I think the earlier, and it's a sector that's going to grow, right? So I think the earlier you can get some exposure to the sector, the earlier you can get, even if it's an internship or start doing reading and understanding the sector and knowing, getting connections in the sector, the better. So, I mean, obviously I'd be, advocate going into the sector.
Yeah, definitely. I also surprised. I'm also with that. And I just think that food tech is in general just super exciting because you can actually apply all the science that you've learned for something that you really love and really close to you. Like you can go into medicine and help some diseases, but realistically, that's not as close to you in general on an everyday basis as food will be. And then when you can be part of such a huge innovative change and like a revolution in food, you really want to be part of it, I think. At least for me, I think.
Maybe I can talk a little bit about lab-grown feed and things like that. So omega-3 is a component of fish feed. Oh wow, I can see my face. But there are many other lab-grown components that are being put out there for other types of feed as well. So actually, forgetting about other types of feed and thinking about fish feed for a second, a good example of this is people are now starting to look at using just bacterial protein, right? Not modified, just pure bacterial protein as a source of protein in fish feed. It's becoming a new space. The only thing that I'm a bit worried about is GM. So in Europe, which is where all the big salmon farms are, especially in Norway, industry is very often anti-GM because they have certain commitments to make to their end consumers. So, for example, the entire Norwegian fish feed industry, people like Skretting and Biomar, they have categorically said they will not be accepting any GM ingredients, right? That's actually okay for us for reasons I won't go into because that's like more of a product feature thing. Yeah, GM's a little bit of a concern. It's starting to be alleviated in places like the UK and France. So I know France, on a completely separate topic, is starting to look at allowing genome editing technologies such as CRISPR. But I don't know too much about that. And I know the UK government is looking at legalizing GM, or legalizing actually GM crops as well. Yeah, that was a bit of a ramble there, but there you go.
Perfect. I'll take over from Bridget from here. And I guess a question for Tristan. With a growing sector in kind of carbon neutrality as well, how did kind of settle up or find a niche in this ever-growing competitive sector? Would you like to elaborate on that?
Absolutely, it's a really, really good question, and one we've agonized over. Actually, I'd imagine you can think. So for us, really early on, we made a decision that we didn't want to compromise on kind of the integrity and the quality of the offsets. So we sort of set out a framework by which we would assess and do due diligence on all the projects we support, to make sure that they really are meeting the highest standards in carbon offsetting, and specifically forestry-based offsetting for the time being. So we make sure that the offsets that we support are there for the long term, and that's really, really important when you're planting trees because they sequester that carbon out of the atmosphere as they grow. So planting trees for the short term is basically null and void. We make sure that all of the contributions made to those projects are additional, so we can specify a very specific number of trees planted or a very specific amount of carbon dioxide taken out of the atmosphere per pound spent. And we make sure that all of the projects are verified and don't sort of have issues around leakage and some other things. But maybe more importantly, we really, really emphasize the social co-benefits. So often with forestry, there are fantastic side effects of planting new forests, and these are often overlooked. So if I take the example of one of the projects that we support in Mozambique, planting mangrove trees, they support equal employment for locals who have a low income, so there's a huge sort of poverty alleviation aspect there. The mangroves themselves, they shore up the coastal ecosystems, so you reduce risks of flooding and sort of coastal erosion, and you also create huge kind of areas for biodiverse species development in those coastal ecosystems because you're totally regenerating the areas. So there are these really sort of notable co-benefits alongside sort of the bread and butter of planting trees, which are going to remove carbon from the atmosphere. And we sort of took this very early on and ran with it and said, look, there's no point doing this in a manner that doesn't really address all sides of this problem. We want to look at it holistically and hopefully sort of stake a bit of a position there as sort of a thought leader in the space. And that's kind of what we've aimed to do, and it's chimed very well. So if you look out there in the market and compare other companies, there are companies that do it more cheaply than us. There are companies that do it more expensively than us. But having that singular focus on kind of the quality of the offset is something that we sort of try and use to set us apart from the others and to gain that sort of unique wedge into the market. And I think what we've seen there is it's chimed really well with businesses that we work with specifically, because from a business point of view, it's a risk mitigation strategy, right? As a business, if you're putting money into dealing with your footprint, it's a real risk if it turns out that 3, 5, or 10 years down the line, there's been something fundamentally wrong with the mechanism by which you've been doing that. So businesses increasingly are really putting more value in doing the footwork themselves on what constitutes a good offset and doing these things for the right reasons. And I think it comes down to this question of greenwashing, which is really closely linked to what we do, and we're very aware of being careful around that. And it's crucial to understand that we only really seek to work with businesses that are looking at the carbon footprint and the climate impact of their operations across the value chain, across the supply chain, and aren't just using this as kind of a cheap PR win, because there's plenty of that out there too. And what's been really nice for us is we increasingly get businesses coming to us, asking us the right questions, asking us, how do we prevent leakage? How do we sort of promote other social care benefits aside from the planting of trees? How can we make this sort of drive benefits that really complement my business? For example, we were talking to a brand that sort of supplies milk alternatives recently for coffee, and they were really interested in looking at potential co-benefits around, coffee plantations and coffee specifically as a mechanism for offsetting. And of course, if managed properly, that's possible. You can have sort of agriculture that is properly managed and generates a certain carbon offset, as long as that's done in the right way. So these are all discussions that we're having more and more, and I think sort of making that niche in that we have an uncompromising focus on quality, both in terms of the projects that we supply, but also the businesses we work with. We won't just work with any business that isn't seeking to implement this in the right way. And I think as we scale, that's going to become more and more of a challenge, because at the moment we're at a position, we're a year after founding, we still sort of engage with every business, every client that we work with directly. We'll jump on the phone with them, we'll understand what it is that they're trying to mitigate and how they want to do that. And we're now at a point where we sort of build out our products and our back end so that can scale a little bit more naturally, without maybe so much human input, which is really the only way that we can grow this quite to the scale that we'd like to. And some of the big challenges that we're facing now is, how do we really do that due diligence piece on the businesses we work with to make sure that they're not just using this for greenwashing? And I think that's kind of quite a unique challenge to the carbon offsetting space specifically, because it's such a direct tool that could be used for those means. So it's a really important one to consider as well.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to know that the quality of your services are being acknowledged by other companies, and as such, it's really good to know.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, actually, it's been really interesting over the last year to see the change in sort of the tone of conversations we're having. I think across the board, there's much more understanding of the climate crisis and the problems that we're trying to solve. And there's much more buy-in to them as well. I'm sure that sort of the other founders here on the panel have found similar conversations are becoming more and more frequent and more targeted in terms of the people we talk to that really have an understanding of the underlying issues that we're all trying to address here.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Cool. So on to the final question. So we want to learn that what would be like a good skill and quality skills you would find valuable for working in a startup? And do you think that the skills you need change along the way as you gain more experience? So maybe Reese could start us off. You've only started your startup like a year ago. Have you found that any skills in particular have been useful?
Yeah, I have, but I actually, can I maybe defer to you, Benjamina, because I feel like you've got quite a bit of experience under your belt, so I feel like you've got maybe a much broader understanding of what people need.
Not a huge amount more. I mean, I think, frankly, if I had to say one skill, is probably determination. I think everything else you probably can find people to help you. The one thing that you will need as a founder to have is determination and just pure resilience of when things go wrong. You need to have the kind of positivity and determination to push through. So that will definitely be number one. Now, in terms of skills, I think it evolves quite a bit. I mean, I've seen really, from being a couple of people, like even when we were kind of 2 to kind of being 4 to being 10 to now soon 15, your skills change and you have to think, and again, they will evolve even more so as we get a bigger board, as we start selling products. There's a lot of things that just evolve. But I think the one thing, if you're determined and really have the hunger to learn and to keep going, you'll figure it out, and you can, you have to be humble to know where your weaknesses are and determined to learn those skills. I think everything else will depend a lot on where, who you have around you and what a startup is. I think obviously the legals was one that I mentioned that I think was more surprising to me, but yeah, there's just, I think management, obviously, if you're going to be a C-level and a founder, you go more, the bigger startup, the more you'll have to learn management skills and deal with different personalities. But all of that you can learn. I think the biggest thing you need to really train is your resilience and determination.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I just wanted to just add that passion will bring you through the worst days and will bring you through the most tiring and stressful periods. It's just you have the passion with you, the passion of all your co-founders, and together you can solve everything. You definitely just need to be curious and proactive of solving these problems.
Yeah, I'd echo that. And I think the fantastic thing for all of us is we're all sort of impact-driven startups one way or another. The companies we're founding are tackling important problems, and that means on those hard days where resilience might be an issue, if we were working on something different, you can kind of take a step back and realize that it's really important, the problem that we're solving, and we are making progress. Every single company here is making progress in the right direction, and I think for me that's been one of the biggest eye-openers, seeing that that's such a driver to keep you going on that sort of resilience question, because undoubtedly it's a tricky thing to do. At the start it's exciting and you think there's a direct line to solve the problem that you're solving and it'll all be fine. In 5 years you'll have cracked it. But it's not usually the case. There are always challenges along the way, and having that resilience, but also having that broader scope of what you're working on being worthwhile, I think is hugely valuable.
Yeah, I agree as well, actually. It's a really good point. The fact that we're impact-driven startups, you're right, Tristan. It really, perhaps it's a bit different for non-impact different startups, because you don't have that kind of meaning that's kind of driving you. But I wanted to add that passion's great and everything. Everyone said, it really brings you through. But I think another probably key trait to have is self-criticism, actually, and knowing that when you've done wrong, and actually being able to pinpoint when you've done wrong and what it is you have done wrong, and being able to learn to move beyond that. I think that's another important quality.
Absolutely, I'd echo that, and I think that links in a lot with what Benjamina was saying, that role really evolves as your startup changes, kind of, and your team grows, and that self-criticism and sort of the humble side of that really feeds into how you grow your team, which areas you choose to get help on, because I think that's really, really critical. But it also feeds into your leadership style and how you lead that team, because when it's you and your co-founder, or a team of 3 or a team of 4, that's one thing. But the more and more people you bring in, the more and more it becomes kind of a people management role, and a leadership role, maybe in the more traditional sense of that. And it is a whole different skill set. And I think being humble in that and understanding the value that others bring to the team is absolutely crucial there as well.
And exactly at that time, it comes that you actually have to think about, okay, what type of leader you want to be and how you want to have your organization. And I think that's that's also a super inspiring part of founding a startup, because you can be different, you can be your ideal company. Is really important.
Thank you for that insight.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but I'm just conscious of the time, and I think we'll have to move into the Q&A session now. So thank you all. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type it in the chat or unmute your microphones and ask them out loud. I guess there's not many questions. I guess on that note, unfortunately, we're at time now, so we might have to finish soon. Any questions? No. Okay, then I guess thank you all then for taking your time off and attending the panel, and thanks of course again to all our speakers and for attending and giving such great insight on creating and running of the startups. Thank you all again for coming. The recording of the session would be made available soon, and we'll post that in the chat. And please approach us if any of you have suggestions for future events. Thank you all for attending then. And
can I just quickly jump in and just wanted to say that if anybody has any questions about founding a startup or anything related to startups, or anything we talked about, feel free to contact me. The company is Multus Media. My name is Réka, so I guess it's pretty easy to find me. So
same here. Benjamina, there's not a trillion of them from HigherSteaks, so yeah, feel free.
Yeah, same goes for me too.
Me too. Always on the lookout for bright people to work with and sort of new ideas to bounce about as well. So you can find us at settlup.earth, and happy to chat about anything if we haven't had time to cover it here.
Yeah. Oh, and just one more thing. I just want to echo what Réka said earlier about the Enterprise Lab. If you are thinking about starting a startup, go to them. They will help you so much. So yeah. You've got us, but you've also got them too.
Yeah, thank you guys. Okay, I guess have a good night then, and thank you again for coming. And yeah, we wish you all the best.
Cheers.
Thank you for the great discussion. Bye.
Yeah, it's been a good one. Bye.
天了.
Hello.
Maybe you can end the meeting now.
Yeah.
Yeah.